Ready, set, secure.
Hey everybody, Hutch here again with Inside the Mind of a Hacker. In this video, we're going to be talking about phishing tactics and specifically the ways that attackers are using malicious attachments in phishing emails in order to gain access to internal networks. Now, it's probably no surprise that one of the most common ways that attackers are getting into networks is via email. Not only is the human element often the weakest link, but it also happens to be the case that anytime an attacker manages a successful hack in this way, they actually completely bypass the perimeter, or the DMZ, and they gain access to the internal network. So most organizations are putting a lot of effort around protecting users from malicious emails. Some of these include your common endpoint protection tools, your egress controls that restrict outbound communication to potential command and control channels, blocking of potentially malicious file types at the email gateway, and then finally, the newer sandbox analysis capabilities, where security controls will review and analyze files that are received as attachments in emails prior to passing them on to the recipient. So now let's talk about how some of these controls are commonly being bypassed. And first we'll talk about endpoint protection. One of the most common techniques is referred to as living off the land. It's this idea that if you use existing tools, protocols, and APIs that are already on the underlying operating system, instead of bringing in your own hacker tools, you can effectively bypass most detective controls. Also, in-memory execution. So rather than writing all of the malicious code in the malicious file that's sent to the user, you only put enough in that file to execute a process that remotely grabs the malicious code from somewhere else on the internet, pulls it into memory, and executes it from memory so that it never touches the file system. Another technique is obfuscating heavily. So putting all different types of routines in the code that do different types of encoding, different types of encryption over and over again. The more that you make that code complicated in that manner, the less likely it is for detective controls to be able to identify what it's doing. And finally, I have if you build it, it will work. This is the idea that almost all security controls are based on known bad activity. So even your most cutting edge machine learning endpoint protection still is based on a known sample that's provided to it for it to be able to do those machine learning routines. So it actually becomes extremely effective to just code your own malware. If you're doing custom malware, the likelihood that it's going to get caught is significantly less. Now, bypassing egress controls is actually fairly easy to do. One way is to use command and control domains that already have an established reputation. If you go to a site called expireddomains.net, you can see the domains that have just recently expired. Because these were previously used and just recently expired, they often already have established reputations as good categories for most of your egress controls. So you can just purchase one of these domains and use it for your command and control operations. You can also pre-stage fake content and then request reclassification of that domain. So put up some type of technology blog or maybe some healthcare information, and then request that the web proxy services reevaluate your domain in order to have it classified as that before you start using it as a command and control server. And finally, you can also use authorized web services. So you can do content hosting and have your payload hosted on sites like GitHub or Bitbucket or Pastebin. File hosting, where you actually host the malicious file on stuff like Drive or Dropbox. And you can even host payloads on things like legitimate web services like social media, such as LinkedIn and Twitter. A couple years ago, to demonstrate how common web services can be used in malware, I developed this Twittersploit proof of concept, which supports command and control operations using a Twitter direct message conversation. This type of technique is becoming an increasingly effective means of exploitation, as many organizations are opening up their networks more to social media. And also, companies are less likely to be performing analysis of this traffic due to increased scrutiny around privacy violations and regulatory compliance. So just to recap, in this portion of the video, we discussed how attackers are bypassing common host-based protection controls and egress controls when introducing malware via phishing attacks. In the second portion of this video, we are going to be addressing the more email-specific controls, such as file type blacklist, the email gateway, and sandbox file analysis. So thank you for joining us and stay tuned.